Rick Walker had just finished his shift at the tire shop when his 7-year-old daughter Lily spotted something that made her stop walking. They were cutting through the alley behind Main Street, the same shortcut they'd taken 1,000 times, when Lily's hand tightened around his fingers. "Daddy, look." Rick followed her gaze toward the row of dumpsters behind the Italian restaurant. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just cardboard boxes and black garbage bags piled against the brick wall. Then he noticed the heel, a single expensive shoe, the kind that cost more than his weekly paycheck, peeking out from behind the green metal container. He almost called out, almost asked if someone needed help, when Lily whispered again, "She's hiding from her husband. She's really scared." The words sent a chill down Rick's spine. He looked at his daughter, at her serious brown eyes that saw things other children missed. Lily had always been this way, reading people like books, sensing emotions that adults tried to bury. It was a gift she'd inherited from her mother, though her mother was no longer here to explain it. "How do you know that, sweetheart?" Lily just pointed. "The lady. She keeps looking at the street like someone's coming to get her." Rick approached slowly, the way he might approach a wounded animal. His work boots scraped against the asphalt, announcing his presence. As he rounded the dumpster, he found her, a woman in her 40s, pressed against the wall, her designer suit torn at the shoulder. Her dark hair had come loose from what had probably been an elegant style, and mascara traced dark rivers down her cheeks. But it was the bruise blooming across her cheekbone that made Rick's hands curl into fists. The woman flinched when she saw him, her whole body coiling like a spring. "Please," she gasped. "Please, I don't have any money on me. I just need a minute. I'll leave. I promise I won't cause any trouble." Rick held up his hands, palms out, the universal gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you, ma'am. My daughter and I were just walking home." He gestured to Lily, who had crept up beside him. The little girl studied the woman with that unnerving perception of hers, then did something that surprised Rick. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled tissue, the kind Rick always made sure she carried. The woman stared at the offered tissue like it was a foreign object. Then something in her face crumpled, the careful mask of control shattering into raw, helpless emotion. She took the tissue and pressed it to her eyes, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Rick lowered himself into a crouch, putting himself at her level the way he always did with Lily when she was upset. "Can you tell me your name?" "Barbara." The word came out broken, barely a whisper. Barbara Sterling. The name meant nothing to Rick. He didn't pay attention to society pages or business news. His world was tire rotations and oil changes, bedtime stories, and parent-teacher conferences. But something about the way she said it, like the name itself was a weight she was tired of carrying, told him this woman was someone important. "Well, Barbara, I'm Rick. This is my daughter Lily." He kept his voice steady, calm, the same tone he used when Lily had nightmares. "Can you tell me what happened?" Barbara's eyes darted to the mouth of the alley, that hunted look Lily had described. "My husband. He found out I was leaving. I've been planning it for months, moving money into accounts he doesn't know about, talking to lawyers in secret. Today was supposed to be the day. I had a bag packed in my car, a flight booked. But Rick watched her hand drift to her cheek, to the purple evidence of what her husband had done. He knew then with cold certainty that this wasn't a situation he could walk away from. Lily's small hand found his, squeezing tight, and he knew she felt it too. The call to help, the inability to look away. "Ma'am, where's your husband now?" "I don't know." She was shaking harder now. "He took my phone. He took my keys. He said if I tried to leave again, he'd—" The threat hung unfinished, but Rick didn't need to hear the rest. 10 years ago, before his wife Marianne got sick, he might not have known what to do, but fatherhood had changed him. It had taught him that protection wasn't about being strong, it was about being present, about refusing to walk away. "I have a truck parked 2 blocks from here," he said. "My apartment's about 15 minutes outside of town. It's not much, but it's safe. and no one knows where it is except my landlord and my daughter's school. You're welcome to come with us until you can figure out your next move." Barbara stared at him. The offer seemed to confuse her more than anything else that had happened. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Lily answered before Rick could. "Because you're scared. And when people are scared, you're supposed to help them. That's what Mommy always said before she went to heaven." Barbara's face crumpled again, but this time when she looked at Lily, something like hope flickered in her eyes. "Your mommy sounds like she was very smart." "She was," Lily said matter-of-factly. "She was the smartest person in the whole world. Now she helps Daddy and me from up there." She pointed at the sky, then back at Barbara. "I think she told us to walk through this alley today so we could find you." Rick felt the familiar ache in his chest, the one that never quite went away. Marianne had been gone for 3 years now, taken by a cancer that had moved too fast for any doctor to stop. He'd learned to live around the grief, to build a life for Lily that honored her mother's memory. But moments like this, when Lily channeled Marianne's gentle wisdom, the ache became almost unbearable. "Can you stand?" he asked Barbara. She nodded, and he offered his hand. She took it, her grip surprisingly strong despite her trembling. As she rose, he noticed other things, the way she favored her left side, the raw skin on her wrist like someone had grabbed her hard. None of it showed on her face anymore. She'd already started rebuilding that mask of composure, brick by careful brick. The walk to his truck was tense. Rick kept Lily between them, his eyes scanning every face they passed. Barbara walked like a woman expecting an ambush, her head swiveling at every sound. Only when they reached his old Ford, the one with the dented fender and the child seat in back, did she seem to breathe. "It's not much," Rick said again, suddenly aware of how the truck must look to someone who probably owned cars that cost more than his apartment. "It's perfect," Barbara whispered. She climbed into the passenger seat like it was a lifeboat, and when Rick started the engine, she closed her eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. "Thank you. I don't even know how to." The words dried up, but Rick understood. Some debts couldn't be expressed, only acknowledged. He pulled out of the parking spot and headed toward the edge of town, toward the small apartment complex where he and Lily had rebuilt their lives after Marianne's death. Behind them, the city fell away, and with it, at least for now, the danger that had driven Barbara Sterling into hiding behind a dumpster. Lily fell asleep within minutes, her head lolling against the car seat. In the silence that followed, Rick could feel Barbara's eyes on him, studying him the way people study things they don't understand. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" she asked finally. Rick glanced at her, then back at the road. "Should I?" A sound escaped her, something between a laugh and a sob. "I'm the CEO of Sterling Enterprises. My face has been on the cover of Forbes twice. My husband, Victor, his family practically owns this city. They have judges in their pockets, police commissioners who owe them favors." The weight of her words settled over the truck cab. Rick processed them slowly, fitting them against what he'd seen in that alley. "And he still hits you," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Barbara was silent for a long moment. "The first time was on our honeymoon. I told myself it was the stress, the pressure. The second time I told myself it would be the last." She turned to look out the window at the darkening fields. "I've been telling myself that for 18 years. Rick thought about Marianne, about the way she'd looked at him on their wedding day, like he was the answer to every question she'd ever asked. He thought about the promises he'd made her, the ones he'd kept and the ones death had stolen from him. "I don't know anything about your world," he admitted. "I don't know about Forbes or enterprises or judges in pockets, but I know that no one deserves what happened to you tonight. And I know my daughter is a pretty good judge of character. If she says you needed help, then you needed help." Barbara turned to look at Lily, still sleeping peacefully, her small face relaxed, in dreams. "She's remarkable." "She is." Rick's voice softened. "She's the best thing I've ever done. After my wife passed, I didn't know how I was going to keep going. But Lily, she needed me. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you just need someone who needs you. The words hung in the air, true and simple, carrying more weight than either of them expected. Rick's apartment was exactly what he'd described: small, modest, and clean. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen that opened into a living area scattered with Lily's drawings and the paperback novels Rick read after she went to bed. It smelled like laundry soap and the rosemary plant dying slowly on the windowsill. "It's not much," Rick said for the 3rd time, and Barbara wanted to tell him to stop apologizing. In 18 years of marriage to Victor Sterling, she'd lived in penthouses with views of the city, vacation homes in the Hamptons, hotel suites that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. None of them had ever felt as safe as this cramped apartment with its secondhand furniture and its child's artwork taped to the refrigerator. Lily had woken up during the walk from the truck, and now she was showing Barbara her room with the solemn pride of a curator at a museum. "This is where my stuffed animals live. They have meetings at night when I'm sleeping, and this is my drawing of Mommy. Daddy says she's watching us from the clouds, but I think she's probably on a star because stars are prettier." Barbara knelt down to look at the drawing, a crayon figure with yellow hair and a huge smile, surrounded by hearts and flowers. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "She looks like someone who gave really good hugs," Barbara said. "The best hugs," Lily confirmed. "Daddy tries, but his hugs are more like bear hugs. Mommy's hugs were like being wrapped in a blanket that was also a hug." The description was so perfectly childlike, so achingly innocent, that Barbara felt tears threatening again. She blinked them back, determined not to cry in front of this little girl who had already seen too much tonight. "Well," she managed, "I bet your daddy's hugs are pretty special too." Lily considered this with exaggerated seriousness. "They're okay, but he's getting better. I'm giving him lessons." From the doorway, Rick cleared his throat. "Okay, lesson giver, time for bed. Past time, actually." "But Daddy, we have a guest who will still be here in the morning," Rick said firmly, "and who probably needs some rest too, just like you." The bedtime routine that followed was a dance Barbara watched from the living room, trying to make herself invisible. The brushing of teeth, the changing into pajamas, the selection of a bedtime story that involved extended negotiation. Rick's voice drifted through the thin walls as he read, low and steady, doing different voices for different characters. It was so normal, so achingly domestic, that Barbara found herself pressing a hand to her chest as if she could hold her heart in place. She thought about the life she'd built with Victor, the charity galas and board meetings, the careful choreography of public appearances. She thought about the nursery they'd prepared 18 years ago, the one that had stayed empty after the doctor explained that the complications from her first miscarriage had made more children impossible. Victor had blamed her for that too. She wondered now if that was when the hitting had started, or if it had always been there, waiting. When Rick emerged from Lily's room, he found Barbara standing at the window staring out at nothing. "I put some towels in the bathroom for you," he said, "and there's a t-shirt and some sweatpants on the bed in the guest room. They'll be too big, but they're clean." Barbara turned to face him. This man who worked at a tire shop and lived in a 2-bedroom apartment and read bedtime stories in funny voices. This man who had seen her at her lowest and offered help without hesitation, without calculation, without any expectation of return. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, because she still couldn't understand it. Rick shrugged, a simple gesture that carried no pretense. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because my wife would have done the same thing without thinking twice. Because my daughter asked me once what a hero was, and I told her it was someone who helped people even when it was hard." He moved to the kitchen, started filling a glass with water. "I'm not a hero, Barbara. I'm just a guy who changes tires and raises his kid and tries to get through each day without messing up too badly. But I know what fear looks like. I saw it on your face in that alley. And I know that sometimes people just need a safe place to breathe." He handed her the water and she took it, her fingers brushing his. The contact was brief, accidental, but something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement that they were both people who had lost things, who had survived things, who were still figuring out how to keep going. "Thank you," she said. And this time the words felt less inadequate. Rick nodded and headed toward his own room. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we can figure out next steps. But tonight, you're safe. You're not alone. And sometimes that's enough." Barbara stood in the small living room long after he'd gone, listening to the silence of an apartment where people actually slept peacefully, where a little girl dreamed about her mother on a star and a father read bedtime stories without checking over his shoulder. It was so far from everything she knew, and for the first time in 18 years, that felt like a blessing. Morning arrived with the smell of pancakes and the sound of Lily's voice explaining in exhaustive detail why unicorns were better than dragons. Barbara woke disoriented, the unfamiliar ceiling taking long seconds to place. Then memory flooded back. The alley Rick and Lily, the small apartment that had become her refuge. She found them in the kitchen, Lily perched on a stool while Rick flipped pancakes with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. When Lily spotted Barbara in the doorway, her face lit up. "You're awake. Daddy's making happy face pancakes. Do you want a happy face pancake?" "I'd love one," Barbara said, surprised to find she meant it. Over breakfast, with Lily chattering between bites, Barbara began to talk. Not about Victor, not about the escape plan that had failed, but about the things she'd learned to hide. The way Victor controlled her schedule, her spending, her friendships. The isolation that had crept in so gradually she hadn't noticed until she was drowning in it. The moment 6 months ago when she'd looked in the mirror and realized she didn't recognize the woman staring back. Rick listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. Lily, sensing the shift in atmosphere, grew quieter, focusing on arranging her pancake pieces into patterns. "I built a company from nothing," Barbara said. "Sterling Enterprises was my vision, my work. Victor's family provided the initial capital, but I was the one who grew it into what it is today. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that success meant I had to accept the rest of it, that the price of being powerful was letting someone else make me feel powerless." She set down her fork, her appetite gone. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I have lawyers who would fight any battle I asked them to fight. But when I tried to leave yesterday, when he grabbed me and Barbara's voice broke, she took a breath, steadied herself. I ran. I left my phone, my keys, my bag with all my carefully prepared documents. I ran like I was nothing, like all those years of building something meant nothing." Lily's small hand found hers across the table. "My daddy says being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're smart enough to know when something is dangerous." Barbara looked at the little girl, at her earnest face and her mother's eyes. "How did you get so wise?" Lily shrugged. "My mommy taught me, and now she teaches me in dreams sometimes. She told me last night that you're going to be okay, that you're stronger than you think." Rick met Barbara's eyes over his daughter's head, and she saw something there. Not pity, not judgment, just steady, quiet understanding. "She's usually right," he said simply, "about the dream stuff. I don't understand it, but I've learned not to argue with it." Barbara wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, wanted to do 100 things that didn't fit in this small kitchen with its mismatched dishes and its dying rosemary plant. Instead, she just nodded and took another bite of her pancake. It was, she realized, the best thing she'd tasted in years. The next few days took on a strange rhythm. Barbara couldn't go back to her apartment, couldn't access her office, couldn't contact any of the people who might have helped her without risking Victor's network intercepting the communication. So she stayed in Rick's tiny apartment, sleeping in the guest room, learning the routines of a life utterly unlike her own. She walked Lily to school with Rick in the mornings, wearing borrowed clothes and a baseball cap that hid her face. She helped with homework in the afternoons, discovering that second-grade math was more complicated than she remembered, and that Lily had strong opinions about the proper way to draw horses. She cooked dinner with Rick in the cramped kitchen, learning that he seasoned everything with garlic and that his late wife's spaghetti recipe was a closely guarded secret that Lily revealed within the first 5 minutes. At night, after Lily was asleep, she and Rick would sit on the small balcony that overlooked the parking lot, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about Marianne, about the way they'd met in a coffee shop when she'd spilled her latte on his shoes, about the 3 years of happiness they'd had before the diagnosis, about the 9 months of fighting and hoping and finally letting go. She told him about the girl she'd been before Victor, ambitious and fearless and certain that hard work could conquer anything. She told him about the slow erosion of that girl, the way she'd been worn down into someone who flinched at raised voices and apologized for existing. "I keep thinking about all the women who looked up to me," Barbara admitted one night. "All the young executives who saw me on magazine covers and thought, if she can do it, so can I." They had no idea that the powerful woman they admired went home to a man who made her feel worthless. Rick was quiet for a moment, his face illuminated by the distant glow of streetlights. "My wife used to say that the bravest thing anyone can do is tell the truth about themselves. Not the truth that makes you look good, the truth that makes you real." Barbara considered this. "And what's your truth, Rick Walker?" He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "That I have no idea what I'm doing. That every day I wake up terrified I'm going to mess up this kid somehow. That I miss my wife so much sometimes I can't breathe, but I have to breathe anyway because Lily's watching." He turned to look at her, his eyes more vulnerable than she'd seen them. "That meeting you in that alley was the first time in 3 years I felt like maybe there's more to life than just surviving until the next day." Barbara felt something shift in her chest, a tectonic movement of emotion she wasn't prepared for. "Rick, She was interrupted by the sound of Rick's phone buzzing. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Unknown number. He answered, his voice cautious. "Hello?" Barbara watched his face change as he listened, saw the color drain from his cheeks, saw his jaw tighten. When he hung up, his hand was shaking. "What is it? Someone called the tire shop today asking about me, asking if I had a guest staying with me." Rick met her eyes and she saw the fear, there not for himself but for her. For Lily. "They know you're here." Barbara felt the world tilt sideways. She'd been so careful, so certain that this place was beyond Victor's reach, but Victor's reach had always been longer than she'd believed. "I have to go," she said, standing abruptly. "I won't put you and Lily in danger." Rick stood too, blocking her path to the door. "You're not going anywhere tonight. It's dark, you have no money, no phone, no plan. Running blind is how you ended up in that alley in the first place. But Lily, tomorrow we'll figure something out. I'll take her to my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She watches Lily sometimes when I have to work late. We'll find you a safe way out of this. But tonight you're staying right here." Barbara wanted to argue. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to draw the danger away from this man and his daughter who had shown her nothing but kindness. But she was so tired. Tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of carrying everything alone. "Okay," she whispered, "just tonight." Rick nodded, but he didn't move away. His hand came up, hesitant, and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The contact was soft, almost reverent, and Barbara felt something crack open inside her. "We're going to get through this," he said. "I don't know how yet, but we will. And when we do, when you're safe and free and building whatever life you want to build." She could hear what he wasn't saying, the question he wasn't asking, the possibility that hung between them like a held breath. "I didn't come here looking for anything," Barbara said quietly. "I know. But sometimes the things we need find us anyway." He stepped back, the moment dissolving but not disappearing. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Barbara watched him go to his room, watched the light under his door flick off. Then she stood alone in the small living room, surrounded by Lily's drawings and the weight of everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. She was still there when the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, still there when she heard soft footsteps behind her and turned to find Lily, tousled and sleep-warm, watching her with those knowing eyes. "You didn't sleep," Lily observed. "I couldn't." Lily pattered over and climbed onto the couch beside her. "Sometimes when I can't sleep, I talk to Mommy. She always knows what to say. Does she talk back? In my head, she does. Lily was quiet for a moment, then reached out and took Barbara's hand. She says you're supposed to stop being scared now. She says the bad man can't hurt you anymore because you're not alone. Barbara felt tears spill down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. How can you be so sure? Because, Lily said simply, Mommy never lies. And she said Daddy's going to help you. And maybe after we can be a family, because I've always wanted a mom again and I think you'd be a really good one. The words hit Barbara with the force of a revelation. This child, this impossible, perceptive, beautiful child, had just offered her something she'd stopped believing she could have, a future, a family, a reason to stop running and start fighting. She gathered Lily into her arms and held on tight. I think, Barbara whispered, that your mommy might be the smartest person in any universe. Lily nodded against her shoulder. I told you, the smartest. The man Barbara had hired years ago, her secret insurance policy, the one person Victor had never found out about, was named James Whitmore. He was a former federal prosecutor turned private attorney, a man who specialized in helping people disappear and reappear on their own terms. She'd paid him a retainer every month for 5 years, just in case. The problem was reaching him without using any device Victor might be monitoring. Rick solved it with the kind of straightforward practicality that had become familiar over the past days. He drove to a gas station 2 towns over, paid cash for a prepaid phone, and let Barbara make the call from the back of the parking lot while he watched for anyone following. James answered on the second ring. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, he said, his voice carrying the calm of someone who had been expecting exactly this call. The situation moved quickly after that. James had been preparing for this moment almost as long as Barbara had. He had copies of all her documents, records of assets Victor didn't know about, evidence of financial manipulation and coercion that would stand up in any court. More importantly, he had connections to federal investigators who had been building a case against Victor Sterling for years, white-collar crimes, money laundering, bribery. They'd never had a witness willing to come forward. Now they did. The day Barbara walked into the FBI field office, flanked by James and 2 federal marshals, felt like stepping off a cliff. She told them everything: the abuse, the control, the way Victor's family had corrupted local authorities. She signed statements and reviewed evidence and answered questions until her voice went hoarse. When it was over, when the agents told her she'd done something incredibly brave, she didn't feel brave. She felt empty, hollowed out by the weight of 18 years finally lifted from her shoulders. But underneath the emptiness, something else was growing, something that felt like the first green shoots after a long winter. Victor was arrested 3 days later, caught trying to board a private plane to a country with no extradition treaty. The federal charges meant that his family's local influence couldn't protect him. His face on the news meant that the world finally saw the monster behind the magazine cover marriage. Barbara watched the coverage from Rick's couch, Lily pressed against one side and Rick on the other. She waited to feel satisfaction, victory, vindication. Instead, she just felt tired and strangely, improbably at peace. Is it over? Lily asked. Barbara considered the question. The legal proceedings would take months, maybe years. There would be testimony and trials and tabloid headlines. Her company would need rebuilding, her reputation would need reclaiming, her life would need restructuring from the ground up. But here in this small apartment with the dying rosemary plant and the crayon drawings on the refrigerator, with a little girl who saw angels and a father who changed tires and read bedtime stories, she had found something she'd stopped believing existed. Home wasn't about square footage or zip codes. It wasn't about magazine covers or Forbes lists. Home was about the people who saw you at your worst and chose to stay anyway, the ones who held space for your fear and your hope in equal measure, the ones who offered pancakes and patience when the world felt too heavy to bear. Yes, Barbara said finally, pulling Lily closer. The important part is over. The rest is just details. 6 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Barbara stood in a much larger apartment, one she'd chosen herself, watching movers carry boxes through the door. The place had 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with windows that actually let in light, and a small backyard where someone had planted rosemary that was actually thriving. Rick appeared beside her, a box of Lily's stuffed animals in his arms. That's the last of her collection. She says they're very nervous about the move and will need extra stories tonight. Barbara smiled, something she did easily now. The bruises had long faded, but more importantly, so had the fear that had lived behind her eyes for 18 years. She was running Sterling Enterprises again, but differently now, with the freedom that came from having nothing left to hide. She'd started a foundation for domestic violence survivors, partnering with organizations that provided the kind of help she'd once been too afraid to seek. She'd given interviews about her experience, using her platform to show other women that power and victimhood weren't mutually exclusive, that leaving was possible even when it seemed impossible. And through all of it, Rick had been there, not as a savior or a rescuer, but as a partner. Someone who made her laugh when the legal proceedings got overwhelming, someone who held her when the nightmares came, someone who reminded her with his quiet steadiness that she was more than her worst days. Lily bounded through the door, her backpack bouncing. "My room has a window that looks at a tree. There's probably going to be birds. I'm going to name them all." She skidded to a stop in front of Barbara, her face suddenly serious. "Is this where we're going to live now? All 3 of us?" Barbara knelt down, meeting those knowing eyes. "That's the plan, if it's okay with you." Lily appeared to consider this carefully. "Will you make happy face pancakes? I'll learn. Will you read bedtime stories? Daddy does the voices better, but I can try. Will you—" She paused, something vulnerable flickering across her face. "Will you be my mom now, for real?" Barbara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different tears than the ones she'd cried 6 months ago. These were the kind that came from a heart too full, rather than one that was breaking. "I would be honored to be your mom," she said, "if you'll have me." Lily's answer was to launch herself into Barbara's arms, holding on with the fierce certainty of a child who had decided something important. Over Lily's shoulder, Barbara saw Rick watching them, his own eyes suspiciously bright. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around both of them, creating a circle of warmth and safety and belonging. That night, in the new apartment that still smelled like fresh paint and possibility, Barbara tucked Lily into bed for the first time as her mother. Not officially, not yet, but in all the ways that mattered. The adoption papers were already being prepared, another legal process, another transformation of something broken into something whole. "Tell me about when you found me," Lily demanded, settling against her pillows. It was becoming her favorite bedtime story, the one she asked for more than any book on her shelf. Barbara sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing Lily's hair back from her face. "Once upon a time, a very scared lady was hiding behind a dumpster." Lily giggled. "Dumpster is a funny word." "It is." But the lady wasn't laughing because she was very, very afraid. And then, do you know what happened? A princess found her. Barbara smiled. A princess and her brave knight, who happened to be on their way home from the Tire Kingdom. And the princess looked at the scared lady and said, "And then Lily took over, reciting the words she knew by heart. She's hiding from her husband, she's really scared. And then Daddy helped her, and then she came to live with us. And then she stopped being scared. And then," Barbara continued, "she realized that the princess and the knight had saved her life, not just from the bad man, but from forgetting how to hope. And she decided that she wanted to spend the rest of her life being their family." "Because that's what families do," Lily finished. "They find each other, even when they don't know they're looking." Barbara leaned down and kissed Lily's forehead. "That's exactly right. You know what Mommy says." Barbara no longer flinched at the word, no longer felt like an imposter when Lily used it. "What does she say?" "She says she picked you for us, from her star. She says she knew Daddy needed someone to love again, and I needed a mom who understood about being scared and being brave. She says we're her happy ending." Barbara had to take a moment, had to let the words settle into the spaces where her old fears used to live. Sometimes the things we need find us anyway. Rick had said that months ago on a night when everything seemed impossible. He'd been right. Do you think she's happy? Barbara asked. That your first mommy is happy about all this? Lily nodded with absolute certainty. She's the happiest star in the whole sky. I can tell because she twinkles extra bright now, especially when you and Daddy kiss. That's gross, but also she likes it. Barbara laughed, a sound that still sometimes surprised her with its ease. Then I guess we'll have to keep kissing. For your mom's sake. For the stars, Lily agreed solemnly. Then she yawned, her eyes already drooping. Good night, Mom. Good night, sweetheart. Barbara turned off the lamp and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the small shape beneath the covers, listening to the sound of breathing that was already deepening toward sleep. In the living room, Rick was unpacking books, arranging them on shelves that were actually built for books instead of stacked from milk crates. He looked up when she appeared, and his smile was like coming home after a long journey. She go down okay? She wants us to keep kissing. Apparently it makes the stars happy. Rick set down the book in his hands and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. Well, he said, we wouldn't want to disappoint the stars. He kissed her, slow and sweet, and Barbara felt it again, that sense of rightness that had been building since a little girl offered her a crumpled tissue in a dirty alley. She had been a CEO, a victim, a survivor, a stranger hiding behind a dumpster. Now she was something simpler and infinitely more complex. She was a mother, a partner, a woman who had found her way home. Through the window, the stars were just beginning to appear, tiny points of light in the darkening sky. Barbara imagined one of them twinkling a little brighter than the rest, a woman she'd never met watching over the family she'd left behind, the family that had expanded to include a scared stranger who had needed saving. Thank you, Barbara whispered, not to Rick, but to that bright star, to the force that had put her in that alley at that moment, to whatever strange magic had given a 7-year-old the ability to see what adults tried to hide. Thank you for finding me. Rick's arms tightened around her. They stood together in their new home, surrounded by unpacked boxes and half-arranged furniture and a future that was still taking shape. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance, and somewhere among them, a mother smiled down on the family she had helped create. The family that proved what Barbara had learned the hard way, in alleys and courtrooms and quiet moments of grace. That sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never expected. That home isn't a place, but a choice. That love, when it's real, doesn't ask you to make yourself smaller. It gives you room to become everything you were meant to be. And that sometimes the most powerful woman in the room is the one brave enough to ask for help, and the most heroic man is the one simple enough to offer it without question. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that help can come from unexpected places. Subscribe to join our community of believers in second chances and found families. Because somewhere out there, someone is hiding behind their own dumpster, waiting for their own Lily to see them, to reach out, to change everything with 6 simple words. Sometimes the family we need is the one we never knew we were searching for. And sometimes all it takes to find it is the courage to stop running and let ourselves be found.